My name is Renee. Welcome to Detours in Archaeology. And today we are going to be watching or listening to The Mummy Returns. And I will be commenting on different parts of it and going into the actual history of things that I notice. I have watched this multiple times. Watched this a lot when I was a kid. I loved it. I thought it was very funny. It made me want to watch the original Mummy more, as I was a little bit scared of it when it came out. But this one, I was not. I've rewatched it since. It is not my favorite. I do like the original Mummy a lot more. And I did watch it to get ready for this. I had to do the research on what I saw, because there's some stuff that I didn't know, but I had pages and pages of notes of things that I wanted to talk about. So, I hope you enjoy. It is free on YouTube for anyone who wants to watch it. The Mummy Returns, 2001, starts with the story of the Scorpion King, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in his theatrical debut. In the story, Ardith Bay introduces the Scorpion King and the city of Thebes 5,000 years ago in 3067 BCE. And we see that the Scorpion King has a 7-year-long battle and loses. All of his men die when walking home from the desert, and Scorpion King himself almost dies. But according to the storyteller, he makes a pact with the dark god Anubis to trade his soul for conquering his enemies. And Anubis answers in the affirmative by sending a scorpion, which Scorpion King bites his head off, and an oasis starts popping up all around him, and he gets command of Anubis' whole army of Anubis-like jackal-headed warriors. Quote, "Like an evil flood, they washed away all that lay before them." Now, they actually did a decent job with having the spears and the axes. They did have those rounded battle axes, which was pretty cool. This is in the early dynastic period, and they were typically functional tools that were turned into weapons. There were examples of axes that look more similar to how we have them today, just like a long stick with an axe head. But then they did also have those curved axes that you can see in the movie. They were usually made of copper, and true bronze alloys and definitely iron weren't widespread in Egypt until much later. They do have the khopesh featured as one of the weapons that some of the men are holding. Unfortunately, that is not realistic to the period, as they first appeared in 25,000 BCE. But it was, commonly used in battle. It was like 500 years before it actually came into use. The shields are pretty cool. Fairly accurate, I'd say. They're made of leather, probably cowhide. They had the Apis bull and everything, so I'd actually assume that there was a very important cow culture. And a lot of them have the scorpion insignia on them, holding the circle, which I assume is supposed to be the sun god Ra. Some of the shields are just rounded, and, they had them. A lot of them were either rectangular or circles, and that is pretty true. They didn't wear, armies didn't have a lot of armor yet, just didn't really exist. I'm not an expert, but I'd say this is fairly good. We do have the shields that have little crescents on the side cut out instead of being strictly rectangular. Not sure how accurate it is or how helpful they would be, but I guess it would be good on at least one side, because then you could get your arm through it. But yeah, I think that they were trying, especially in this first scene. They also have the golden crest that they're holding up on the poles, and that has the two snakes next to the sun, and that would be Wadjet, the cobra snake goddess, with Ra in the middle. That is a very typical symbol of ancient Egypt, which makes it obvious that the Scorpion King does represent a group in ancient Egypt, although we're never told who. If we look at the Scorpion King's sword, right above where his hand is, you can see two scorpions, and obviously we see his bracelet with Anubis' head on the scorpion. That is pretty much completely made up, but it looks cool, so why not? The Wadjet snakes on the crest have a sun disk on their head with the horns of Hathor, and all of these gods are pretty old. Hathor is thought to be one of the oldest gods, even before Osiris and Isis came to prominence in the 4th dynasty, which was between 2613 and 2498 BCE, and that's when the Great Pyramids were built, and the Sphinx, and probably the Sphinx, although some people argue that the base of the Sphinx is older. I don't want to get into that. However, this is, again, about 400 years before that starts. And the subtitles do say that the Scorpion King is speaking an ancient Egyptian language. Obviously, I have no idea. I don't know ancient Egyptian, would not be able to translate it, so I'd say there's no 7-year campaign on record before the 4th dynasty. It was just not in the history books. And the Egyptians love to brag about winning whatever they won. For Anubis, to give Anubis your soul, 1, not a dark god, 2, he helped you get into the afterlife. That was his job. He was the god of mummification, and he was the one who put the weight on the scale in so many works of kingly art, so he would help you pass the test of the heart weighing ceremony, because it had to be as light as a feather. The feather of Ma'at, order versus chaos. The feather of Ma'at was all about order and justice and truth, and your heart could not be lighter than the feather, but it could be as light. The whole heart weighing ceremony was when you talk to the 42 major gods, and each of them would ask you a question. You could not lie to them, so whenever you said something bad that you did, like whenever you answered in the positive, as in, Scorpion King, have you ever killed anyone? You're supposed to say, no, I have never killed anyone. But obviously he just killed a bunch of people. He would say yes, and then his heart would get a little bit heavier. It would be heavier than a feather. But Anubis, in a lot of these works of art, puts a weight on the feather side, so it'll balance it out, so you can still pass the test and get to the field of reeds, which is basically heaven. But so Anubis is a very helpful character in Egyptian mythology. He is man's best friend, basically. But let me get to this. We were talking about Thebes. For one thing, 3067 BCE, Egypt was in the early stages of the early dynastic period. As I said, it was 400 years before the 4th dynasty, so really early. The early dynastic period was between 3150 and
2686 BCE.
And this was following the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. This era saw the consolidation of power by the first pharaohs, with kings like Hor-Aha, the successor to Narmer, strengthening centralized control and establishing the capital near Memphis, not Thebes. Thebes is thought to have been inhabited from around 3200 BCE, but the earliest monuments in the city itself that can be dated, that are still visible, are from around the 11th dynasty, so like the 21st century BCE. So 4,000 years ago, not 5. So this is like 1,000 years after this all happened. And the 21st century BCE is when the rulers of Thebes united Egypt and made Thebes the capital of Upper Egypt. It was the eponymous capital of Waset, the 4th nome of Upper Egypt, and at the time it was still a pretty small trading post, while Memphis served as the royal residence of Old Kingdom pharaohs. So, unlike the movie that is like all built up with giant temples and just a whole bunch of different buildings, it wouldn't have looked anything like that city. An obviously huge accuracy problem is that Anubis did not have an army in any way in any part of the mythology, and it is perfectly clear to anyone that knows Egyptian mythology, really, that he wasn't evil. He was not a conqueror. Like I said before, he was man's best friend. Although there are examples from modern media often emphasizing the frightening aspects of death, who frequently portray Anubis as an evil ruler or leader of the undead. But there were zero myths in which Anubis had warriors that acted like an evil flood that washed away all that lay before them, as Ardith Bay says. Also, it's kind of weird that the Scorpion King was allowed to conquer, but then he never actually got to lead the city before Anubis took him. Like, before Anubis took his soul to serve him by just being, stuck in wherever he was until, I guess, 5,000 years later when he came back, and we'll get to that. Additionally, a common modern visual trope shows Anubis, or in this, his warriors, wearing a nemes, which is the striped pharaonic headdress. It's usually blue and white, and this is what is shown in The Mummy Returns,
Not.
rarely supported by ancient depictions. What is also strange is that the Scorpion King's golden bracelet, which guides the characters throughout the movie, is already worn by the king during the first battle. I guess that was just his thing. And it already has the jackal's head on the scorpion's body, which does make some sense why he wanted to make a pact with Anubis, but why not Serket? But why did he already combine them? I guess he just liked combo gods? Sure. And the Scorpion King was the Akkadian in his movie. However, no idea who he actually was in charge of. They never say in his movie. They just call him the Akkadian throughout his movie, which, sure, obviously someone from Akkadia could come over to Egypt and he could rule, especially since he was speaking ancient Egyptian, so he's probably ruling over somewhere in Egypt. And the fact that he was honoring Egyptian gods, not Mesopotamian gods, not Akkadian gods. Speaking of scorpions, a little bit, Serket, also pronounced Serkets with a Q. Selkis, or Selket, is an Egyptian goddess of protection, scorpions, venom, healing, and magic. Because they believed in something called homeopathy, which means whatever could hurt you could also heal you. Which is also why the goddess Sekhmet, the Egyptian lion goddess, who is a goddess of war and disease, is also a goddess of protection and healing. But Serket is venerated as a great mother goddess from the pre-dynastic period, which was 6000 BCE to 3150 BCE, so until the earliest dynastic period. Her full Egyptian name, which I cannot pronounce, meant she who causes the throat to breathe, and reflects her power of protection against and to heal the scorpion stings and breathing difficulties, and amulets that bear her name were worn for this reason. She guarded early kings like the Scorpion Kings, and her worship spread from the Delta into Upper Egypt. She is depicted as a beautiful woman with arms outstretched in a protective pose, kind of similar to how Isis will be depicted in the future, and with a scorpion on her head. It's often shown without a stinger or claws to emphasize her benevolent rule. She was also associated with the primordial waters of Nun, and later rode on the solar bark of Ra, defending him from the serpent Apophis. Which, if you listen to my episode about Set, you know that he also was one of the gods that protected him from the serpent Apophis and would kill Apophis every night. That is until the pharaohs like to put themselves in his place. In myth, she appears alongside Isis, Nephthys, and Neith as a nurturing goddess who nurses kings, and in some versions of the Osiris cycle, protects Isis in childbirth and watches over the infant Horus in the marshes, rather than Hathor, and sending her scorpions as bodyguards. As the Osiris religion gained prominence, many of Serket's early motherly attributes were absorbed by Isis, and Serket's rule shifted towards death, judgment, and the afterlife, more like helping people get there in the nice way. She became one of the guardian deities who would watch over the souls in the watery route to paradise and help justify the dead to breathe again, and punish the wicked with suffocating venom. In royal funerary practice, she protected the intestines of the deceased king through her association with, I remember how to say this,
Qebhessenuef,
who is one of the 4 sons of Horus, and is shown on one of the canopic jars. Qebhessenuef is associated with a canopic jar that is typically topped with a falcon head, and is the guardian of the West, which was actually known as the Land of Death. That is why the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, and the Great Pyramids of Giza are all on the west bank of the Nile, not the east. East was life because the sun rose in the east and set in the west when Ra would die every night. But getting back to Serket, although she had no major temples, Serket remained highly influential as a patron goddess of physicians. Her priests and priestesses, the followers of Serket, practiced medicine within the Per-Ankh, or the House of Life, combining careful diagnosis with powerful spells that invoked her to draw out poison and disease, like Sekhmet as well. Through this healing role, Serket's protection extended from birth and everyday dangers like scorpion stings to the afterlife. But another culture which is pretty important in the movie, tangentially I guess, is ancient Mesopotamia, as in Acadia was in Mesopotamia, since the Scorpion King was Akkadian, although it doesn't really come up in this movie. Either way, the Scorpion goddess Ishara was highly revered as a goddess of love, fertility, and marital union, which may be why he picked the scorpion in his original movie, because he did fall in love and became king with that soothsaying woman. But additionally, mythological scorpion men, Akrabula Melo, which are kind of like centaurs, because you know how centaurs have the full body of the horse and their full man torso and head are where the horse's head is? Well, it is exactly like that, but with a scorpion, and are also known as Gertaglilu, and this is also from Mesopotamian folklore. They were the guardians of the sun in the Epic of Gilgamesh, acted as guardians in the temples and portals associated with the sun god Shamash. But in contrast, they did also serve, in some creation myths, the dragon chaos goddess Tiamat. I'm sure you all heard me say that Serket guarded the Scorpion Kings. That wasn't a false statement. You heard right. There were actually 2 kings called the Scorpion Kings roughly 5,000 years ago. The first one, called Scorpion I, who ruled around 3300 BCE in Upper Egypt, likely from Thinis, was one of the earliest verifiable Egyptian rulers. His tomb, designated UJ in the Abydos Royal Cemetery, yielded significant artifacts like imported wine jars, gaming pieces, and an ivory scepter. It also contained some of the earliest examples of Egyptian pictographic writing and labeling, underscoring his importance in really making early Egyptian history. In 1995, researchers uncovered a 5,000-year-old marking, also known in archaeology as a graffito, the plural graffiti, during the Theban Desert Road Survey, also marked in his tomb UJ, which features the symbols of the scorpion and illustrates his victory over another proto-dynastic ruler, who was possibly this place called Naquitous King. And the graffito also references the defeated king or the location called Bull's Head. It could be a guy, it could be a place, and could actually be referring to Taurus, the bull. I mean, they didn't have all the same constellations that the Greeks had, which is where we get our constellations from, but they did have the bull. They had a scorpion. It is believed that Scorpion 1 united Upper Egypt by entering a union with Nekhen's royal house in Thinis. The next one, Scorpion 2, also known as King Scorpion, possibly Selk, or strangely enough, Waha, who is another proto-dynastic ruler of Upper Egypt, sometime between 3200 and 3000 BCE in Nekhen, which was called Hierakonpolis by the Greeks. His precise identity and relationship to early kings are still debated, even with Scorpion 1. He is best known from the large ceremonial scorpion mace head from Hierakonpolis, which shows him wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and performing a ritual agricultural act, which is thought to be cutting the first furrow or opening irrigation dikes, and surrounded by attendants and divine standards. So, the procession pulls with godly symbolism on top. A possible second but now lost image with the red crown hints that he would have claimed Upper and Lower Egypt, since the red crown is the upper part in the back, which is supposed to be a symbol of the lotus, while the white crown was a symbol of papyrus. So the different symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt, respectively, but flipped. But it's now lost, so we don't actually know if he ever actually wore it. While earlier interpretation characterized him as a ruthless conqueror, contemporary archaeology views him as a key figure in establishing Egyptian civilization, contributing to its prosperity, its order, and early unification. Even though, presumably, Egypt was already unified, but he helped hold it together in the early stages, I guess. Evidence from ivory tags, rock and vessel inscriptions, and Nubian rock carving at Gebel Sheikh Suleiman suggests that he ruled over important nomes, fought Nubian enemies, and played a significant role in early political unification and consolidation of the Nile Valley. Other material culture of his time reflects long-distance trade, increasingly complex irrigation systems as a base of royal power, and a rich symbolic word of gods, the standards, and hybrid creatures that show strong but temporary Mesopotamian artistic influence, possibly playing into how they ended up writing the Scorpion King in this movie and in his movie. But despite this Near Eastern influence, modern scholarship emphasizes that the Egyptian civilization itself developed indigenously within the Nile Valley, with deep African roots, and that his foreign motifs were adapted into a distinctly Egyptian cultural and political framework. His tomb has not been directly identified, though there are proposed places for burials with the scorpion-marked ivory tags at El Ka'ab, specifically to B50, and Hierakonpolis, to HK 6-1. But then we ask, with Serket or Ishara already on the table, why Anubis? Well, so it sure seems like one of these Scorpion Kings could be the one that the movie's king is based on, since Anubis was known as the protector of tombs going as far back as the Old Kingdom, circa 3100 BCE, which this movie is after that, so that could make sense. Though, following the real Anubis mythology, I'm not sure why the king would pray to him in this instance, because Anubis didn't do that. But, getting back to this movie, the Oasis of Sher was never a real place, or even a place in Egyptian mythology. It doesn't even mean anything in Arabic, or really any other language for that matter. I got curious to see if I could even map it with anything, or maybe if the subtitle spelled it wrong, because heck, that happens. But the closest that I could get would be the transliterated as ahim shear, which means sighing share, but from the English it translates differently, so who knows what they were actually going for, other than it sounds cool and vaguely Middle Eastern. But they could have just asked someone who speaks Arabic what would be a good name for an oasis. Rick's tattoo is brought up for the first time in the movie, and it is a big plot point. Later, we learn that the wrist tattoo marked him as Magi, the ancient sacred society of warriors tasked with guarding the Pharaoh, the city of the dead, Hamunaptra, and apparently protecting the world from dark curses. In the movie's lore, Rick, after being orphaned at a young age, unknowingly received the mark, but kept it concealed under his leather wristband for most of his life. Why? Who knows? Getting this tattoo apparently marked Rick as having this destiny, even though if he's marked as Magi, all of the Magi have this tattoo, which I will actually talk more about later, so marking him as really special, who knows? But the parts of the tattoo that were pointed out are the pyramid, the eye, and the two kings. So the pyramid, pretty easy. Pyramids, major symbol of divine power and just marking ancient Egypt in general. The eye of Horus, at the center of the design, is the ancient Egyptian symbol of protection, power, and good health. Two kings, so why two kings? Not sure, but the pharaoh is the living embodiment of Horus, who is, a god for kingship and royalty. So it's another kind of protection thing. I'll talk more about this when the movie gets to it. So it does make sense that this collection of symbols is protection for the pharaoh and protector of Egypt. But I don't know if it's actually, real. But there's more to the tattoo and the backstory and everything, but I'll talk about it when the movie gets to it. In the movie, Evie kicks a snake, and I think it's meant to be a coral snake based on the similar coloring. Coral snakes are venomous and are colored red, black, and yellow or white, and they are found in Africa. But the snake in the movie is more red with black and white stripes, and that's a pretty common color combination. They just have, different percentages and different patterns depending on what snake you're looking at. But to make sure that the actors were safe, I'm sure, they probably got a bunch of non-venomous milk snakes. They are walking through a burial chamber that Evie happens to just have visions and knows where they're going. And Egyptian burials were sometimes stacked on top of each other, even though, usually we hear them in elaborate tombs. But that was just for kings and, the nomarchs, the really, really rich people. So they were stacked on top of one another in family vaults or elite tombs. But they were still in coffins, or at least wrapped. They were mummified in some sense. They're in coffins, but this is a very niche thing, but it looks like the layout of the priest vault in the New York City catacombs under St. Patrick's Cathedral. Or, a little bit less niche, the underground catacombs seen in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The Egyptian ones did look a little bit different, but there are a lot of different ones. And really the only actual catacombs in Egypt were the catacombs that were built in the Roman period in Alexandria. And it sucks that when I went to Alexandria, me and my mom forgot and did not do it. So we just got a tour of the city, which, in itself was nice, but wasn't catacombs. The ancient Egyptians took burying people, especially preserving the body, extremely seriously, and would not bury a body without some sort of wrappings, whether they stuffed it full of, jewels or had elaborate coffins or whatever. They did do something. Even common people would have been naturally mummified after being wrapped and buried in the desert, which is where they get natron anyway, and bury them again afterwards. They would not have just put bodies all over this room, and it's so wrong. it hurts a little bit that there are a ton of scattered bones on the floor that they step on or stepping around, and there are a bunch of bugs everywhere and snakes and stuff. It would have been extremely disrespectful to the bodies, to the families. They never would have buried people that way. If they were buried that way, they might have never gotten to the afterlife because their bodies weren't preserved. You need your body to get to the afterlife. That's kind of the whole point of mummification. The only explanation I can think of to justify this is that grave robbers came in and tossed the bones around. Really, for the movie, though, it adds to the horror premise. They're just a bunch of bones. Spooky. We figure out later that Evie was the princess and she was the bracelet's protector. But my question is, why would the path to the bracelet go through a tomb? Usually pathways and burials and stuff, they're separate. Bodies are not supposed to be disturbed after they're buried. Obviously, if this is a vault, more people are added later, so that makes sense. But why would it be in the direction of the place where 2 guards are standing behind gilded doors? That was a thing in Egypt. But why would you lock guards in with a single treasure, as in the bracelet? Especially if the whole myth was that 5,000 years he'll come back. We'll get to that, but these other things, we will never know. Ancient Egyptians did have locks. They actually invented the pin tumbler lock, the mechanical system that predates modern locks by over 4,000 years. They did not, however, invent combination locks like the one shown in the movie. With the clicking around, didn't exist yet. They were developed much later in the Middle Ages and the 19th century. But they had a key in the first one. I guess that wasn't a combination lock. They just turned and it was fine. But, I guess they had to make it a little bit more complicated for this movie. I'm going to skip ahead to the flooding. We already know that they did not have stupid, elaborate booby traps that would destroy a whole building. A bunch of tombs did have hallways that would lead to empty rooms and even to pit traps that grave robbers could get lost in or get stuck in and then die. So they did have traps, but not like, ooh, let's shoot spikes out or arrows or drown you in the Nile. They didn't want to do all of that. It's just crazy. And also, who would have set it up beforehand? How did those mechanisms not break down over thousands of years? Unfortunately, though, a lot of the time, the builders were actually the ones who came back to rob them because they already knew all the directions where the hidden chambers were and even where hidden gold statues were, because they would hide them in the walls sometimes and put them in the mummy wrappings. So they could actually get all of those goods. While they're being flooded by the Nile, Alex is knocking over the columns like dominoes, which is a little visual nod to when Evie did that in the library in the first movie. In the next scene, an excavation is underway in Habanaptra, uncovering Imhotep. They also find the Book of the Living and the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Living doesn't actually exist. There's no book of solid gold, and is sometimes kind of conflated with the Book of the Dead. But even the Book of the Dead isn't a natural book, or at least not archaeologically. It is now collected work, often published in books, but it's a compilation of texts that were carved and painted in pyramids and tomb walls and on/in coffins. So pyramid texts and coffin texts. The scarabs are flesh eaters again. In real life, they are not, but this is a horror movie adventure. The goddess Khepri would be so disappointed, especially after bringing Ra back to life every night, keeping the sun going. They found Imhotep, and he was in some kind of resin or amber. In the first movie, he just kind of let himself be dragged down into a pit of liquid souls. Did these harden? I don't know whatever happened to that. It's just kind of weird. Because that's where Anck-su-namun's soul came out of in the last movie. And they had a bunch of faces going up while he was thinking. The next possible inaccuracy, when we flash over to England, our heroes arrive home, which who knows how long that took. They do have airplanes at this point, but they're extremely expensive and not common until after World War II. So they probably took a ship and trains. But Rick brings up the tropical drinks with the little umbrellas. But depending on which origin myth for the little umbrellas that you subscribe to, they might not have existed yet. The writers probably went with the story that went with Don Beach, the owner of Don the Beachcomber in Hollywood, California, as the person who is credited with starting the trend of using those little cocktail umbrellas around 1932 after collecting South Pacific souvenirs. And since this movie is based in 1933, it is possible. He sold these to Victor Bergeron of Trader Vic's, who used them until World War II, and they kind of fell out of fashion for a little while. Another myth, or even connected to it, who knows, is that the Hawaiian bartender Henry K. Yee, during the 1950s tiki craze, introduced the umbrellas to drinks in 1959. Possibly using stock ornaments from the bar or exchanging ideas with Beach in Hawaii after World War II. The tiki trend wasn't even getting big until after the Great Depression and after World War II, so like in the late 40s, 50s, and onward, when people had more wealth to spend. Not to say that they couldn't have existed, just that Rick actually knowing about them in 1933 seems a little bit unlikely. Especially because he lived in England. But it's funny, and it's a cultural touchstone for us now. The story that Evie tells Rick is that the Scorpion King is supposed to rise every 5,000 years. But if his whole story that Ardith Bay told at the beginning and his death happened 5,000 years ago, how did they know? It's never happened before. Was there a tablet made with the whole story written on it? And then, of course, it goes, if someone doesn't kill him, he's going to wipe out the world. And Evie asks, how did you know? That's always a story. What story is this written in from back then? Apocalypses in mythology don't usually present themselves in this way. They're almost always cyclical. See the Norse Ragnarok. I mean, that's a later example. Or the Hindu Yurga cycles, for just 2 examples. And, hey, in Egypt, the death and rebirth of Ra, the sun, daily. There is the idea of second death in Egyptian mythology, but that's a personal thing if a person doesn't pass a scale test against the feather of Ma'at, and then their soul is devoured by Amut. But the more end of the world did come up in Zoroastrianism, which is, one of the oldest mythologies in the world, as what I found to be called the final renovation. But the event known as Frashokerti marks the permanent end of historical chronological time. But following the final battle led by the savior figure Saoshyant, the dead are resurrected, and a river of molten metal destroys all evil and imperfection. So while the world as we know it completely ends, everything is basically a paradise. That seems fine. So yeah, not much to worry about in the end. But of course, in Christianity's Book of Revelations, the world experiences cataclysmic plagues, the return of Jesus, and the fighting of angels and demons on earth and just wiping that all out. And then the final judgment, which is Armageddon. And the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all of that jazz. But afterwards, the current material earth and sky are entirely destroyed. In the story, they are rolled up like a scroll, and believers are taken to New Jerusalem, and the existing universe is permanently dissolved without being physically reborn into a new era of history. But in what stories is the end of the world actually a plotline before Christianity, and more so before superheroes? Those have world-ending consequences, and the hero needs to save the day. But the story stops short of ever reaching the prophecy storyline. They always do save the world. They defeat the bad guy. And why would someone wipe out all life? Then you have no one to rule over. Just never makes much sense to me. Even Thanos wanted to keep half of the creatures in the universe and then just sit back and enjoy his farm. Why he couldn't just enjoy his farm on his own? Who knows? Hey, maybe he wiped out everyone on that planet. Continuing the legend, Ramses IV, 3,000 years ago, which is close enough to being right, he did die in 1148 BCE, so the movie's really only estimating by like 81 years. But anyway, Ramses IV undertook building projects and had writings where he sent men to mine turquoise in Sinai. But he only reigned for 6 years after becoming pharaoh at 12. So I'm not sure why the writers chose him specifically. They definitely could have picked another pharaoh that lived closer to 3,000 years ago. Plus, the story said that that was the last successful expedition to Shere, but none of them ever made it back. So how is that deemed successful? How would they have known that they made it? Quoting Pirates of the Caribbean, which lives in my brain all the time, where did these stories come from, I wonder? And then Evie says, Alexander the Great, Caesar, and Napoleon all failed. I suppose at least either all their men didn't die, or they looked around for it, never found it, went back, said we didn't find it, so it's a failure. Or they had better records that they said, hey, none of our men came back, I guess they failed. All supposedly found it, but then died. Or didn't find it, died, and never came back. So that's also a failure.
So many options, so much tragedy.
But then in the scene, the bad guys arrive at the house. This is about 10 minutes after our heroes return home, because they pull up in the car while Rick and Evie are still having this conversation. So I have to assume that they were not on the same transportation, the same boat, or on a boat right alongside of them, because then why didn't they attack before? One, that would have been interesting, but maybe they took private ships, or they got on a plane. I don't know how they traveled. Or maybe it took them days to actually learn about it, so they had to rush back. Evie brings up the Year of the Scorpion. Not a thing. Ancient Egypt did have its own calendars and different year tracking. They actually had 3 calendars. They had the regal years. The official government years would reset with each new pharaoh. Documents were dated by the monarch. So, year 5 of the reign of King Ramses IV. They had the civil calendar, which was a 365-day administrative year for daily life and taxes. It had 12 months, just like ours, but their months had 30 days plus 5 extra festival days. Because it lacked a leap year, it slowly rotated through the solar year over a 1,460-year cycle known as the Sothic cycle. So that might be what they're referring to when they talk about the Year of the Scorpion, but again, they didn't have them represented by animals. This is not the Chinese calendar. At least, not that scholars have been able to find or have published. The last calendar they had was the lunar or religious calendar, which was a 354-day calendar tracking lunar phases. It was used to schedule specific religious rituals, temple ceremonies, and agricultural festivals. To keep it roughly aligned with the seasons, a 13th month was added every few years. But none of these calendars had a Year of the Scorpion. It was made up. After Alex puts on the bracelet of Anubis, he is shown the Great Pyramids of Giza. But he is shown them more or less by how they look now, or at least presumably in 1933, because they do not have the white stone covering that would have been on there originally. But there's a temple in front of the pyramids and another small pyramid, which probably wouldn't have been rebuilt by then, because a lot of the smaller pyramids have been at least partially reconstructed. But mainly, are those still there at that angle of the pyramid? Although I'm not sure which direction they're looking. also, at that angle, where's the Sphinx? You should be able to see it, but again, maybe it's on the other side of the pyramids. Then you're fast forwarding through a lot of different landscapes. You have the Nile, deserts, oasis, mountains, before landing on Karnak. But Karnak is just up the Nile. It's not necessarily an oasis, but the trees and everything, like oasis vibes, which could just be along the Nile. But there's no mountains in between, especially not if you're following the Nile, because there are no waterfalls in Egypt. But Karnak is just a river. You could have just literally taken a boat from Cairo, especially before the dam was built, even after the dam was built. But this is before the dam was built. This is the 30s.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology, The Mummy Returns Commentary, Part 1. I know I didn't get very far into the movie itself, and that I didn't talk a whole lot about just ancient archaeology, but there is a lot of this movie that I have little issues with, and just historical things that I want to point out. I find it fascinating, so I want to share. Next time we'll get definitely further into the movie and have a lot of archaeology and history as well. If there's anything in previous episodes or this one that I didn't point out, let me know. Maybe I forgot it, maybe I ran out of time. Maybe I didn't know about it.
Thank you for sticking around and listening to me rant about this movie and its inaccuracies and some of its accuracies. This one is a bit worse in terms of accuracy to ancient Egyptian history than the first movie, but it's still enjoyable. I still like it. I don't know how long it'll be until I watch it again. I would recommend going to watch it. If you're just listening to this on the podcast, 1, thank you. 2, I recommend going over to my website and looking at the pictures. Like, I have screenshots from the movie along with the real places and artifacts as part of the article, so the script. Or hopefully you can go to the YouTube video and see the photos edited. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, comment on whatever platform you're listening to or watching.
It is the best way that this podcast will reach new people, and I appreciate you helping me grow.
And if you have any comment, if you know anything I got wrong, corrections, questions, just random little tidbits, please do not hesitate to send them to me. You can comment below. You can send me an email at detoursandarchaeology@gmail.com, or you can go to my website and contact me that way. You can go to my Twitch channel and talk to me there, or my Discord. Both of those links will be in the description. Contact me any way you want. However you want to do it is totally fine.
You can find me on Blue Sky and on Instagram at Flying Sepida, SEPIIDA. If you're listening to this on ArcPodNet, thank you so much for finding me. And if you want to listen without any ads, you can find this podcast on its own, and it is free, and it'll be ad-free.
I do have a shop where I have my artwork. Most of it has nothing much to do with the podcast. It's just a lot of like little art things that I do, and I will have an Etsy shop as well where I sell my direct artwork and everything that I make personally, including the bones that I paint. All the sound and the screenshots are from The Mummy Returns from 2001 from Universal Studios, so I do not own any of it. And the other music is from Scott Buckley, and all of his music can be found at scottbuckley.com.au. I hit you with a lot of fun facts this week.
Here's a really important one. especially for summer.
Protect against ticks. If you have a tick on yourself, as it is summer, do not put nail polish over them. Don't try to smoke them out of you, because they will suffer and they will spit their poison into you. They will grow up in you and that will get you sick. Just use tweezers or a tick key and pull them out as much as you can. This is really important to me right now because I just had a tick in my stomach that I found out about the morning after being in the field. So be aware of ticks. Don't get Lyme disease. Protect yourselves.
According to my doctor, ticks don't start feasting on your blood until it's been attached to you for about 24 to 36 hours. And it won't release any bile or anything into you until after it's done eating. So make sure it's not engorged. If it's flat, you're pretty much safe. Just stay wary and always check yourself. By the way, I am extremely sorry about the audio. I recorded this after I got a new laptop and my microphone did not plug in at all. Thank you for your patience. We'll be back in part 2 of The Mummy Returns commentary. But until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep taking those detours. Thanks.